I'm joined now by Alan Mendoza, the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, a transatlantic foreign policy and national security think tank. Alan, well, we talked about this, we were talking about it. You were saying that you don't think Vladimir Putin wants to take over the whole thing. Well, we're here now. What do you think?
Well, the fact that he is highly likely to invade doesn't, again, mean he wants to take over the whole thing. There are numerous scenarios that could play out now, ranging from just a military battle of some kind to a limited territory grab to the entire territory grab. What's clear is that British and American intelligence seem to think that this is on the cards for this week. And, we can't judge whether that's correct or not, but we can say that clearly he's got the force in place to do it if he wants to.
Is this your Michael Foot moment where you say it's not going to be a hurricane? No, do you remember that?
That's a terrible moment.
That
yes,
was,
exactly.
Because you don't. Do you think that there's going to be a war then? Because from what you're looking at, 120,000 or so troops on the border, an incursion, not an invasion, as this is what they're calling it. It looks to me like he's setting up for war, and he's said this once before and then actually gone ahead with it.
Yeah, I think Putin looks like what he's trying to do is devour Ukraine like an artichoke, one layer at a time. I mean, he's basically going to peel off the next layer. He's already taken 2 layers off. He's now going to go for the next layer. And I think he's going to probably do that simply on the grounds that he won't want to incur swingeing Western sanctions. And he probably thinks that if I do a limited incursion, I'm going to test the West. Let's see what their reaction is to me doing this incursion. Are they going to put those big sanctions they warned me about on? Or are they going to have to go, oh, he's only taken, a few miles of territory. We'll only have to slap on limited sanctions instead.
Well, he's got a partnership, though, now with China, right? So Russia have this nod to the pipeline, which will obviously supply lots of the EU. And also Germany don't seem that happy about getting involved with any of this at all. And I was reading that apparently they've supplied Russia with weapons. That's what I was reading. I don't know how true that is. And then, of course, China have a huge hold on supply of goods throughout the UK and obviously around Europe. We don't have a leg to stand on.
Well, we've got legs to stand on, but the central thing of what you've said is correct in the sense that the Chinese are playing ball with the Russians because they want to see how the West responds as well, given their own interest in Taiwan and potentially taking over Taiwan. So for the Chinese, this is very much a dress rehearsal. It's like, look, let's get the Russians out front. We'll not stay in the front ourselves. Let them go out front. We'll see what happens with the West, how this responds, and that will give us some sense of how they might respond to us down the line. But when it comes to leverage, look, we do have leverage. I mean, the reality is that the sanctions we would impose would cripple the Russian economy. There's no doubt about it. Now, that may not be something Vladimir Putin particularly cares about in the short term. In the longer term, it will matter.
How will those sanctions cripple Russia, though? I mean, they could get supplies for things from China. What is it that we specifically supply to Russia that will make them be concerned of losing us as an ally in any respect?
Well, it's really the financial system. So, the architecture of the sort of global transaction system is American. It's SWIFT. If you know, when you ever have to do international payment, you've got to type in a SWIFT code. If the Russians are locked out of that, suddenly they lose the ability to trade globally. Now, they can get it back in a manner of speaking, but it's going to take them time, it's going to be painful, and it's going to be a big correction for the Russian economy while that happens. So while it may not be, the issue that we're trading with them as such, there is this whole point that they rely on our architecture, if you like, to do their transactions. So that is a sort of main leverage, as well as the oil and gas sanctions. And of course, you're right to say, well, Europe needs Russian oil and gas, but there is a time period before it really kicks in that Europe can go without, and equally the Russians need to sell the gas as well and the oil. So there is...
But they know they need to sell it, but they will sell it because it's needed. The need is greater than their need to sell. Right? They have it.
Well, they won't sell it if there are sanctions.
Yeah, but how are... No, but then where will Europe get its gas from? I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That's all very well you saying that, and it'll take time. From what I'm looking at, strategically, Vladimir Putin is moving very slowly, as you said, layering things one at a time. I probably wouldn't call it an artichoke. I'd probably call it an onion. Different layers. I don't quite know what an artichoke looks like when I put it in my head. But when I look at this, to me, this is not looking good for the rest of the world. This looks to me like the beginnings of World War III. And I'm looking at the UN as well, and NATO and all these bodies. What's their involvement? Ukraine isn't part of NATO.
Well, Ukraine's not part of NATO, of course not. And of course, Putin is claiming that NATO is trying to encroach on his territory. The reality is that there is no, kind of push at the moment or drive, even remotely, for Ukraine to be a NATO member. It can't be a NATO member because it's got land divisions with Russia at the moment. So there's no possibility of that happening. And Putin knows this deep down. So NATO's interest is mainly about the countries to the west, if you like, of Ukraine and to the north of it, the Baltic states, which are members, the Eastern European countries. Those are, of course, our NATO allies, and that's why we've been putting troops, and the Americans have been putting troops into those countries. The point being to send a message to Russians to say, if you roll into Ukraine, don't think you're going to continue rolling all the way through into Eastern Europe, because, you know, one goal he might have is a resumption of the Soviet Empire, which he's spoken about in the past.
Well, that's what I thought, you see. That, to me, that looks like the obvious thing that he's after. I can't really see anything else. And with the partnership that he appears to have with China, do you think things would have been different if Trump was in power? Because remember, Trump and Putin, they seem to get on. Trump seems to get on with all the sort of different despots around the world.
Well, I think, you know, there's two things about the Trump administration. Firstly, Trump, you know, did sort of get on better with those people, you're quite right. But at the same time, his actual administration was very tough on the Russians. If you look at what the State Department was doing, expulsion of diplomats, they were constantly pressuring the Russians to behave, all those actions. I think you've highlighted something, though. In all the 4 years that Trump was in power, Putin didn't try anything like this.
Not at all.
It's fascinating that the moment Trump's out of office, he's trying something. Now, you could say, oh, that's because he and Trump were mates, but actually they weren't matey in that sense. I think it was more the case that Trump was a very unpredictable actor internationally, and you never could tell what the guy was going to do. He could be, you know, ridiculous at times and, you know, kind of give a green, you know, sort of light to things. But other times, he was very strong in his action. And I think every dictator looked around and thought, I'm not going to mess with that guy, just in case I'm going to be on the end of his nuclear missile, in that sense. Not that I'm suggesting Trump would have done that, but the point is, the fear would have been there to stop people from doing things. And I think that's quite important. You need to have fear. And at the moment, I'm afraid the US, because of what happened in Afghanistan in particular, there's no fear right now about annoying the Americans.
Alan, thank you so much for joining me. Very interesting stuff right there. That's Alan Mendoza, Executive Director for the Henry Jackson Society. This is GB News.